It all started with a ridiculous fall, a broken tooth, and a laugh that came at the absolute worst time. What should have been just another humiliating story quickly turned into a private war between two stubborn, provocative people who were completely incapable of admitting that maybe they were affecting each other's lives far more than they should. The pothole had no business being that deep. Violet Donovan stared at the uneven curb, as if it had personally insulted her, which, in a way, it had. 2 minutes earlier, she had been walking beside a perfectly acceptable man named Brandon, listening to him explain the stock market with the confidence of someone who had never actually lost money. Now she was on the sidewalk of Maple Street in Ashford, Connecticut, with a piece of her front tooth in her hand and a sharp metallic sting reminding her of the disastrous fall. Brandon was still apologizing. Loudly. "I swear I just lost my footing. I reached out and—" "Brandon, yes? Please leave." "But your face—" "Brandon." He left. She watched him go with the dignity of a woman who has just lost a piece of her smile, but refuses, absolutely refuses, to cry in public. The late afternoon sun made the whole block glow a soft honey color, which felt like the universe laughing at her. Somewhere a radio was playing an old song about second chances. She hated it. Her tongue kept finding the jagged edge every time she flinched. A kind stranger pointed her toward a dental office 2 blocks down, a small, tasteful building with a hand-painted sign that read, "Ross Family Dental." Violet walked there with her hand cupped over her mouth, rehearsing the story in her head, and trying to find a version of it that did not make her sound completely ridiculous. She couldn't. There wasn't one. The receptionist took one look at her, said, "Oh, honey," and got her into a chair within 10 minutes. "The doctor will be right with you." Violet nodded, because speaking still felt risky. The room smelled like mint and something sharper underneath, the clean chemical smell that always made her think of school nurses. A light hummed overhead. She could hear the muffled voice of someone in the next room, and a drawer opening, and then footsteps. The door swung in. He was tall. That was the first thing she noticed, because he had to duck barely under the frame. Broad shoulders under a white coat, dark hair pushed back from his forehead like he'd run a hand through it a minute ago and forgotten. If this story is touching your heart, show your support. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends. Every action helps us keep bringing you new stories full of emotion. "Good afternoon, Miss Donovan. I'm Dr. Ross." His voice was low and even. Professional. It carried just enough warmth to suggest he'd done this 1,000 times and still cared. She relaxed about half an inch. He washed his hands. He snapped on gloves. He sat on the rolling stool, lowered the chair with a smooth press of the pedal, and tilted the overhead light away from her eyes. All of it was done without hurry, without fuss. She noticed the steadiness of his hands before he even touched her. "Tell me what happened." She opened her mouth to answer, and her pride tried to jump out the window. "I was on a first date." "Okay." He slipped on the curb. "Okay." And he grabbed me, for balance, like I was a railing. There was a very small twitch at the corner of his mouth. "I see." We both fell. I hit my face on the sidewalk. "Any loss of consciousness?" "Only of self-respect." She said it flat, the way she said everything when she was embarrassed. She meant it as a dry little aside, a pebble of a joke to soften her humiliation. He didn't laugh. He just nodded and tipped her chin up with 2 fingers, gently, the touch so impersonal that she felt obscurely insulted. "Open, please." She opened. He leaned in and she could smell the faint trace of cedar from whatever soap he used, and the mint from the practice, and something that was probably just him. His eyes stayed on her mouth. Professional. Clinical. She told herself that very firmly. "Upper right central incisor. Clean fracture. We can save this." He pulled back. His eyes met hers for the first time, brown and steady. "It's going to be fine." She felt her shoulders drop half an inch she hadn't known she was holding. Something in his voice did that. It annoyed her. "Can I keep talking, or do you want me to shut up?" "You can talk. I'll let you know." So she talked. She told him about the date, the conversation, the pothole, the way Brandon had yelped like a startled goose on the way down. She gestured with both hands because that was how she always told stories. The dentist prepared a tray, measured something, laid out instruments in a precise row. She noticed that he aligned every single tool, perfectly parallel. Exactly spaced. You're very neat, she said. I am. I bet your spice rack is alphabetized. It is. He didn't smile. She did a little, and then winced because it hurt. He turned back, instrument in hand. His face was composed again. Kind. Focused. She had no idea, sitting there in that chair, that she was about to make this man laugh harder than he had laughed in years, and that she was going to hate him for it. Not yet, though. For now the light was warm, his hands were careful, and Violet Donovan believed, briefly, that this afternoon might still be saved. It wasn't. Julian Ross had not laughed at a patient in 12 years of practice. He was proud of that. Not everyone knew how hard it was. You got people who cried, people who fainted, people who told you their entire divorce between rinses. You kept your face still, you nodded. You handed them a tissue, it was part of the job. He would not have believed that Tuesday afternoon that the streak was about to end because of a woman with brown hair curling damp at the temples and a chip of tooth she'd carried in her palm like a penny. He was preparing the bonding material when she started the story again, this time with more color. The first telling had been the summary. Now, relaxed by the topical numbing and the predictable rhythm of his hands, she was giving him the director's cut. So his knee buckles, she said. Uh-huh. And instead of, I don't know, falling like a normal man, uh-huh. He lunges at me, Dr. Ross. Julian adjusted the light. He kept his face very careful. Like a linebacker. Like a drowning raccoon. There was a small pause. He grabbed me around the shoulders, she went on, her voice rising into that bright, furious register that people use when they're still too close to the humiliation to laugh at it properly. Both arms. Full commitment. Like I was a life preserver. Except I weigh 120 pounds and he weighs... She gestured vaguely, generously. A lot. Julian nodded. He reached for an instrument. He was fine. He was a professional. We went down like a sack of wet cement. His mouth twitched. And this is the part that really bothers me. Don't, he thought. Don't tell me the part. He said while my face was on the sidewalk and my tooth was in pieces in my mouth, he said, "Oh wow, are you okay?" Like he had nothing to do with it. Like he'd been an innocent observer of his own body. Julian made a sound. It was meant to be a polite, professional hum of understanding, but it failed completely. And I spit out the tooth, she said, and I looked at him and I said, Dr. Ross, I said, get out of my face before I lose the rest of them on purpose. The laugh came out of him before he could close his mouth around it. It was loud. It was short. It was followed to his horror by another one. He turned his head away, shoulders shaking, trying desperately to regain his composure. He tried to say something reassuring, but the amusement in his voice betrayed him. I'm sorry, he managed. I'm sorry, She stared at him from the chair. Dr. Ross, Another laugh escaped, helpless. I'm so sorry, it's not funny, It's not funny. I know. Then why are you laughing? I don't... He laughed again. It was at that moment that Violet Donovan, 30 years old, licensed veterinarian, owner of a small and much-loved clinic on Birch Street, decided that she had reached the limit of what a single afternoon could ask of her. She sat up. She untied the paper bib. She placed it with great deliberate precision on the tray beside his perfectly aligned instruments. He finally stopped laughing. The last sound died in his throat when he realized she was on her feet. Miss Donovan... No. I apologize. That was completely unprofessional. Please, let me... Dr. Ross. Her voice had a tight quiet in it now. He preferred the anger. He could work with anger. You just laughed at me. I know. I'm so sorry. Please sit back down and let me finish with a broken tooth. I know. In your chair. I know. She reached for her purse. He stood up. The rolling stool shot backward and hit the counter with a small clatter, which under any other circumstances would have embarrassed him deeply. Miss Donovan, your tooth is still broken, I am aware. You can't leave like this. Let me at least... She was already at the door, one hand on the knob. She turned and looked at him over her shoulder, and he saw very briefly that her eyes were wet, and that she was furious about the wetness more than anything else. I'll find another dentist. Miss Donovan, one who knows how to behave. The door closed behind her, not slammed. Worse, shut cleanly, the way you close a door on somebody you have decided no longer exists. Julian stood in the middle of his own treatment room with a composite syringe in his hand and absolutely no idea what had just happened. The receptionist peeked in. "Doctor, did she—" "She left." "Oh." "In the middle." "Oh no." He set the syringe down. He straightened the tray. He realigned the instruments she had shoved out of place with the paper bib, and then realigned them again because he was annoyed, and then a third time because he could still hear her voice saying, "One who knows how to behave." 12 years. 12 years of nervous kids and difficult extractions, and one memorable adult man who had cried about a filling and never, not once, had a patient walked out on him. He told himself it was her problem. She was clearly a handful. A woman who stormed out of a chair with a broken tooth was not a woman whose opinion mattered. He told himself this several times. He believed it for almost a full day, 3 weeks. That was how long Violet managed to pretend Dr. Ross did not exist. 3 full weeks of eating on the left side of her mouth, avoiding mirrors that showed her profile, and refusing to say his name out loud even when her best friend asked. Then came the phone call. Vi, pick up, pick up, pick up. Maggie Hart did not do subtle. Maggie did volume, capital letters, and the occasional shriek. She had been Violet's best friend since the 9th grade, when she'd stood up in home economics and told Mrs. Kellerman that yes, Violet was crying. And yes, it was because Tommy Pruitt had said mean things. And no, Mrs. Kellerman, she would not sit back down until Tommy apologized. Tommy had apologized. Maggie had been Violet's person ever since. I'm picking up, what happened? I met someone. Violet exhaled. She had been sorting dog food donations in the back of the clinic, and she sat down on a bag of kibble with a small, relieved thump. Maggie, I thought somebody died. Somebody might. Me, of joy. Okay, tell me. His name was Peter Calloway. He managed the hardware store on Cherry Street. Maggie had gone in for a curtain rod, and he had walked her through the aisle explaining brackets with, in Maggie's words, a level of enthusiasm that was genuinely unusual for brackets. They had dinner that night. They had breakfast the next morning. It had been 2 weeks. 2 weeks, Vi. That's not long. I'm going to marry him. Maggie. I am. I feel it in my teeth. Violet winced. Her teeth, she thought, were no longer reliable narrators. She met Peter 3 days later. He was tall, friendly, a little loud, and had the kind of open laugh that filled a whole restaurant. He asked her about her clinic and actually listened to the answer. He asked what kind of dog she thought Maggie should get, which Violet later learned was a trick question, because Maggie had been lobbying him for a dog for exactly 8 days. Violet liked him. It was hard not to. So, Peter said over dessert, Maggie tells me you're the best vet in the state. Maggie exaggerates. She also said you're the best cook. That's a lie. And that you're single. Peter. Maggie across the table had her hands folded under her chin in an attitude of perfect innocence. I have a friend, Peter said. No. Best friend, actually. No, Peter. Great guy, tall, professional, very... Peter. I just had a dental emergency. I am not dating anyone. I am not meeting anyone. I am going to be a small, sad widow of a woman with a clinic full of dogs, and that is the end of the story. Peter laughed and raised his wine glass. Fair enough. Maggie kicked her under the table. Violet pretended not to notice. The first group dinner was 2 Fridays later. Peter had chosen the restaurant, an Italian place on the corner of Maple and 6th. He'd picked it, he said, because the table in the back could fit 6 comfortably. Violet had asked several times who the 6 were. Peter had answered in vague terms. Work friends, a cousin, some people she should have known. She walked in at 7 on the dot, because she was always either early or catastrophically late. The hostess led her to the back. Maggie spotted her first and waved with both arms. Peter stood up. A woman Violet had never seen smiled at her. A man in a grey sweater turned around. Violet stopped walking. Her hand, which had been holding a glass of water the waitress had just given her, squeezed a little too tight. She did not, thankfully, drop it. She did, however, make a sound, a small one, somewhere between a hiccup and the noise a cat makes when it sees a cucumber. Dr. Ross looked up, His face went through 3 expressions in less than 2 seconds: surprise, recognition, composure. The last one was fastest. She hated him for it. "Vi, come sit, come sit." Maggie was patting the seat beside her, oblivious. "You know everyone except Julian, Peter's best friend. Julian, this is Violet, my best friend, the one I've been telling you about for—" "We've met." His voice was perfectly even. The table went quiet in a way that 3 seconds earlier it had not been quiet. Maggie looked between them. Peter looked between them. The woman in the grey sweater, whose name Violet had not yet learned, looked deeply interested. "You've met," Maggie said. "Briefly," said Julian. "Professionally," said Violet. There was a small, dangerous pause. Then his mouth moved. Not a real smile. A corner of one. Slow, private, unmistakably pleased with himself. "How's the tooth, Miss Donovan?" She set her water down. "Fixed," she said, "by somebody else." Somebody who can hold a straight face. Fascinating. Gifted, really. Maggie's mouth was opening and closing like a fish. Peter was frowning. The woman in the grey sweater had picked up her wineglass and was watching them over the rim like this was the best show she'd seen in months. "Sit down, Vi," Maggie said weakly. Violet sat down. She sat directly across from him. She did not look at him. She made a very tiny, very dignified adjustment to her napkin on her lap. Across the table, so did he. She lifted her eyes just for a second. His were already on her. Brown. Steady. Amused in a way that made her teeth hurt, for reasons that had nothing to do with the incisor. This, she understood with sudden, grim clarity, was going to be her life now. She picked up her menu. She did not read a single word of it. By the 3rd group dinner, Julian had identified her tells. She rubbed the side of her nose when she was nervous. Right side, with her knuckle, quick and light. She did it when Peter asked her a question she didn't want to answer. She did it when Maggie brought up the word dating. She did it, he noticed, with a warmth that was not strictly professional, when he walked into a room. This was useful information. He stored it. He was, in general, a man who collected information quietly and used it later. It served him in his practice. It was serving him now in what he had come to think of privately as the Donovan problem. The Donovan problem had 3 parts. 1. He had laughed at a patient, which was a professional failure he did not know how to stop revisiting. 2. He had been waiting for almost a month for her to come back. She had not. Somebody else had fixed her tooth, and every time he noticed the clean line of the repair across the table from him at dinner, he felt a small sour pinch of something he refused to call wounded pride. 3. She was, annoyingly, the most interesting woman he had met in a long time. He was dealing with all 3 by needling her. It was working, sort of. The 4th group dinner was at Peter's apartment. Peter had grilled. Peter had also, at Maggie's instruction, lit candles, which none of the men had noticed, but which had caused Maggie to say, "See, this is the vibe." Julian arrived last on purpose, because arriving last meant he got to pick his seat. He picked the one across from Violet. She noticed. She did not look up from her plate. "Evening, Miss Donovan." "Dr. Ross. You look well." New haircut." She paused with her fork halfway to her mouth and considered him. "No. It suits you." She set her fork down very slowly. Maggie, already delighted, pretended to be busy with her napkin. Peter handed Julian a beer without being asked. The 5th guest, a college friend of Peter's named Dale, was telling a story about his boss that nobody was listening to. Julian reached for the salt. It was sitting at an angle. He straightened it against the edge of the pepper shaker, not because he needed to, but because they were not quite parallel, and it was bothering him. Violet's eyes flicked to his hand. Her mouth moved, just barely. Almost a smile. She reached forward and, with one finger, nudged the salt shaker a full inch out of alignment. He looked at her. She looked back, chewing serenely. He reached out and straightened it. She moved it again. "Is there a problem with the salt?" Peter asked. "No," they said together. Maggie snorted into her wine. Julian kept his face absolutely still. Violet picked up a napkin and began folding it in precise thirds, just to watch him try not to notice. It was a very long dinner. "You're impossible," Maggie said in the kitchen later, loading the dishwasher. "I am not impossible. He's impossible. He offered you a ride home. He offered me a ride home because he wants to smirk at me for another 20 minutes. Vi. Maggie, the man, laughed at me. That was a month ago. He was still laughing inside tonight. I could see it. He has laughing eyes, Maggie. It's disgusting. Maggie set down a plate, turned and crossed her arms. She was shorter than Violet by a comfortable 4 inches, which meant that when she wanted to look intimidating, she had to tilt her chin up, which only made her look more like a determined owl. You like him. I do not. You like him, and you're scared because you think any man who sees you fall apart once will use it against you forever. Violet stopped rinsing a fork. Don't therapy me. I'm not therapying you. I'm observing. Observe somewhere else. Maggie kissed her on the cheek, hard, and went back to the living room. Violet stood there for a moment, with the water running. Her reflection looked back at her from the dark window above the sink, and her hand came up without her permission and touched the side of her nose. She stopped immediately. She turned off the water. He was on the front porch when she finally came out. Not alone. Peter was there too, and Dale and Maggie had come out behind her, bundling into her coat. The others were saying goodbye. Julian had his keys in his hand already. I'll walk you to your car, he said. I have legs. I noticed. Maggie made a small, strangled sound. Good night, Dr. Ross, Violet said firmly. Drive safe. Miss Donovan. He gave her a small nod, just a nod, and then, as she walked past him, he said, not loud, not quite for the group. Tell me if you change dentists again. I like to keep a list. She stopped on the step. She turned. She opened her mouth to say something devastating, and nothing came out, because he was smiling. Just the corner. Just enough. And his eyes were doing the thing again. The laughing eyes, the ones she had told Maggie about. She closed her mouth. She kept walking. She made it to her car before she let out the breath she had been holding, and she drove home with both hands tight on the wheel and her jaw set, and she did not touch her nose once. Not once. She refused. Back on the porch, Peter clapped Julian on the shoulder. So that's a no on the matchmaking then. Definitely a no. Right. Firmly. Got it. Peter looked at his best friend of 20 years. His best friend of 20 years was still looking at the spot where her taillights had been. Man, Peter said, shut up. I didn't say anything. You were going to. Peter smiled and did not say anything. Julian walked to his car with his hands in his pockets, and the taste of her perfume still somehow on the cold air, even though she had not, at any point in the evening, stood close enough to him for that to be possible. It was going to be a problem. He was aware. They're in love. Peter sputtered his coffee in surprise. It was a Sunday morning, and Maggie had woken him up by saying that sentence directly into his ear, with no introduction whatsoever. He had been enjoying a very nice dream about a hardware convention. Now he was not. Who? Julian, Violet, Maggie. They are? Maggie, it's 7 in the morning. They don't know it yet. That's the problem. Peter sat up against the headboard and rubbed his face with both hands. His girlfriend of 3 months was sitting cross-legged on top of the duvet in one of his t-shirts, hair up in a messy knot, eyes bright with the particular energy she got when she had a plan. He had learned in those 3 months that when Maggie had a plan, he had 2 options, help or be run over. He reached for his coffee. He held it with both hands. He sighed a long, patient sigh. Tell me. So she told him. She told him about the salt shaker, about the way Julian had watched Violet walk to her car, about how Violet had not said his name once on the drive home, but had said, "He's just so arrogant," Maggie, approximately 11 times, about the look on his face when Peter had teased him on the porch, about the way Violet had touched her nose at the sink. Peter listened. He was not stupid. He had noticed most of it. He was just, in his own way, waiting to see if it would play itself out. They could figure it out on their own, he said. They will not. Maggie. Peter, honey, love of my life, light of my kitchen, have you ever met 2 more stubborn people in the history of adult humans? I've met you. I will ignore that. She unfolded her legs, got on her knees and looked at him seriously. I'm telling you. If we don't do something, they are going to spend the next 2 years provoking each other over salt shakers, and then one of them is going to meet someone else, and we're going to have to watch Violet cry at a wedding that isn't hers. I won't do it. I refuse." Peter considered this. He drank his coffee. He thought about Julian, who had been his best friend since they were 6.5, and who had been alone in a clean apartment for too long, and who had stared at a woman's taillights on a Friday night like he was trying to memorize them. "Okay," he said. "Okay? I'm in." She launched herself at him. Coffee sloshed. He laughed. "What's the first rule?" she asked, muffled against his shoulder. "They can never know. They can never know. Ever. Ever. If they find out, they won't find out. If they find out, Mags, they will never forgive us, and then they will stop talking to each other forever, and we will be responsible, and Julian will never make me laugh again, and Violet will move to a different town and die alone with 7 cats. I know. Okay. We have to be good at this. We have to be great at this." She sat back and held out her hand. "Operation. Operation what?" "I don't know. We need a name." "We don't need a name. Every good plan has a name. Maggie. Operation Dumb Dentist. No. Operation Fix the Vet. Absolutely not." They settled after some debate on nothing, because they could not agree, and it was becoming clear that the plan did not actually need a name to work. They got to work. Step 1 was a dinner. It was announced as a casual thing. "A double date," Maggie said, "just the 4 of them. A reservation at a small place Peter knew downtown. Violet said yes because she was tired of saying no to things. Julian said yes because Peter asked him, and Peter almost never asked him for anything socially, and he thought he owed him. Violet arrived at 6:30. She sat down at the table and looked at the 4 place settings and waited. At 6:40, a text came from Maggie. "Babe, I am so sorry. Peter is sick. We can't make it. You two please eat without us. The reservation is already paid. I am mortified." Violet stared at her phone. She looked up. Julian was walking in the door. He stopped halfway across the restaurant. He looked at the table, he looked at his phone, he looked at her. He walked the rest of the way very slowly and pulled out the chair across from her. "Peter's sick," he said. "Maggie too. Convenient. Incredibly." They sat there for a long second. A waiter appeared. They ordered, mostly because it was easier than leaving, and mostly because the reservation was, as Maggie had said, already paid for, and Violet was many things, but not a person who wasted a free meal. The conversation was stiff for 5 minutes. Then Julian asked her, without looking up from his menu, if the new dentist had done a good job. And she said, without looking up from hers, that yes, he had, and that he had also not laughed at her, which she considered a baseline professional standard, and his mouth twitched. And then somehow, against every intention either of them had walked in with, they were talking. About work. About Peter and Maggie. About the time Julian had, at age 11, fallen off a dock and lost his 2 front teeth, which was, he admitted, why he'd become a dentist. About the cat Violet had in her clinic right now, a 3-legged tabby named Miriam who bit everyone but her. She laughed twice. He noticed both times. He did not laugh once at her. Not the whole meal. And when the check came and he reached for it out of habit, and she slapped his hand away and he pulled back and said, "Serious, Miss Donovan. It was already paid, remember?" She laughed a 3rd time, and he felt it somewhere low and unprofessional in his chest, and he looked away before she could see his face. He walked her to her car. He did not open her door. He was not that kind of man on a first. He stopped himself. It was not a first anything. "Drive safe," he said. "You too." She got in. He watched her go for the 2nd time. Across town, Maggie threw both arms in the air from her couch. "Stage 1, she said. "Oh no," said Peter. "We are cooking." Peter put his face in his hands. He was already regretting everything. The tooth. The tooth came up at the worst possible time, which was a Wednesday over coffee, in the middle of what had been, up until that moment, a perfectly neutral conversation about Peter's grilling habits. Julian had dropped by Peter's store to pick up a new porch light. That was the whole errand. He had not intended to stay. Peter had pushed a coffee into his hand anyway, and they had ended up leaning on the counter near the register, talking about nothing. which was the kind of friendship Julian valued and almost never admitted he valued. Then Peter said, casual, "Oh, by the way, Vi got her tooth fixed last month. Did you know?" Julian set his coffee down. "Yes. Some guy over on Elm. She said he was fine." "Fine. That's the word she used, yeah." Julian stared at a rack of keychains for slightly too long. Peter, who had not been trying anything, blinked. Then Peter, who was Maggie's boyfriend after all and had been paying attention for 3 months, tried very hard not to smile. "You okay, man?" "I'm fine." "Uh-huh. She can see whoever she wants?" "Sure. It's her mouth. Obviously. I don't care." "I can tell." Julian looked at him. Peter looked back, innocent as a glass of milk. "Who?" said Julian in a voice he tried to keep flat. "On Elm." The dentist on Elm was named Gerald Finch. Julian knew him. Gerald Finch had been 2 years behind him in dental school, had cheated on a practical exam, had been caught, had been suspended for a semester, and had passed in the end with what everyone quietly agreed were the lowest marks allowed by the board. He had a wide smile, a weak handshake, and a habit of calling colleagues brother in a way that made your skin itch. Violet had let Gerald Finch fix her tooth. Julian realized, standing in the hardware store with a porch light in one hand and a coffee going cold in the other, that this was bothering him to a degree that was not professional. It was not even ethical concern. It was something older and less dignified. He identified it, honestly, because he was an honest man when forced to be. Jealousy. Of a tooth. He set the coffee down. He paid for the porch light. He left Peter's store. He drove home and installed the porch light and realigned the mail on his kitchen counter 3 times, because if he was going to feel ridiculous, he was going to feel ridiculous in a clean house. She knew something was wrong at the next group dinner. Julian arrived on time. He sat down. He said hello to everyone except her. He said it pleasantly. He passed her the bread basket without looking at her. He was polite. It was unbearable. Violet, who had spent the week preparing responses to his provocations, found herself with no provocations to respond to, and she discovered, against her will, that this was worse. Maggie kicked Peter under the table. Peter shrugged, mystified. It was the woman from the first dinner, the one in the grey sweater whose name turned out to be Dana, who finally cracked it open. Dana was an old friend of Peter's, loud, blunt, a contractor who ran her own crew. She had the kind of laugh that rearranged a room. "So, Violet," Dana said, spearing a piece of chicken, "Peter tells me you got your tooth fixed by Gerald Finch." Violet, mid-sip, froze. Julian did not look up from his plate. "I did," she said carefully. "How was he?" "He was fine." "Fine?" "He was professional." Dana, who had no idea she was walking through a minefield, took another bite. "Gerald Finch," she said cheerfully, "is a crook." The table went very quiet. "He did my sister's crown, fell out in 3 weeks. He charged her again to fix it. Charged her again. Can you believe that? Man is a crook, Vi, I'm just telling you." Violet's fork stopped moving. Julian finally looked up. He did not say anything. He looked at Violet, and his face was carefully blank, and she had the distinct feeling that underneath the blankness there was something like, "I told you so," pressing hard against the inside of his teeth. "It's been 2 months," she said to Dana, not to him. "It's fine." "Sure," said Dana. "Just check it now and then." She moved on to another story. The table moved with her. Julian went back to his food. Violet, under the tablecloth, rubbed the side of her nose. He caught her on the way out, not on purpose. Or at least not on purpose in a way he would have admitted to Peter. He was putting on his coat in the hallway when she came out of the bathroom, and the hallway was narrow, and they ended up very close to each other for about 3 seconds. He smelled, she noticed, like cedar and something warmer, clean, still annoying. "Miss Donovan." "Dr. Ross." A word. "It's late." "It's a short word." She crossed her arms. "Go." He hesitated. He did not, as a rule, hesitate. He saw her notice it. He cleared his throat. "If the tooth bothers you at any point at all, I have a dentist, Dr. Ross." You have Gerald Finch. I have someone. Someone with a suspension on his record. Dr. Ross, come to me. He said it quietly, not as a challenge, not as a provocation, as a flat request or something closer to it, and it landed differently than any sentence he had said to her yet, and she felt the change and did not know what to do with it. She looked at him. He was looking at her mouth, not in the way he had looked at her mouth in the dental chair, not clinically, just for a second, just long enough that she felt it on her lips like a brush of warm air. He pulled his eyes back up. Too late. Good night, Miss Donovan. Good night, Dr. Ross. He left. She stood in the hallway for another minute before she rejoined the others, and when Maggie caught her eye across the table, Maggie saw immediately that something had moved inside her best friend that Violet did not yet know how to name. Maggie did not say anything. She just picked up her wine, slow, and smiled into the glass. The phone rang at 11 in the morning. Violet was elbow deep in a guinea pig's cage, trying to explain to a 10-year-old boy that his guinea pig, Mr. Pickles, was actually a girl and had been a girl the entire time. The boy was taking it badly. His mother was taking it worse. The guinea pig, to her credit, was not taking it at all. Dr. Donovan, the receptionist leaned into the exam room. It's Peter. Violet blinked. Peter. Maggie's Peter. He says it's urgent. The dog. He doesn't have a dog. He says he does now. She finished the guinea pig appointment with what grace she had left, washed her hands twice, and picked up the phone at the front desk. Peter's voice came through breathless and worried in a way she had never heard from him. Vi, I know this is last minute, I know, but something is wrong with him. He's not eating, he's shaking. And Maggie said, you're the only person I trust with this. Please, bring him in. I'll make room. 2 o'clock? 2 o'clock. She hung up. She turned to her receptionist, Joyce, who was 72 and had worked at the clinic since before Violet had bought it. Joyce had a short grey bob and no tolerance for nonsense. Peter's bringing a dog in at 2. Peter doesn't have a dog. He says he does now. Said Joyce, and wrote it in the book. At 2 on the dot, the front bell chimed. Violet, washing her hands in the back, called out that she would be right there. She dried her hands on a paper towel. She smoothed her hair. She pushed through the swinging door into the waiting room. She stopped walking. Peter was not there. Julian Ross was there. He was holding a puppy. The puppy was perhaps 8 weeks old, some kind of mostly golden retriever, with one ear that flopped and the other that stood straight up, as if it had only recently received the news that it was a dog and was still adjusting. The puppy was licking Julian's jaw with great enthusiasm. Julian was holding the puppy with the stiff-armed dignity of a man who has never held a dog in his life. Dr. Ross, she said, Miss Donovan, where is Peter? Peter had a work thing. He called me. He said the dog did not appear to have anything wrong with it. The dog appeared to be living its best possible life. Joyce, behind the desk, made a sound that could only be described as a snort. Room 2, Joyce said, in the voice of a woman who had figured out approximately everything. The exam room was smaller with him in it. Violet had noticed this at the dinner table too. He had a way of occupying space that did not depend on moving around. He could stand perfectly still, and the room would get smaller by 2 feet in every direction. She disliked it. She also privately liked it, which she disliked even more. She gestured to the exam table. Put him up here, please. Julian set the puppy down. The puppy promptly tried to walk off the edge of the table. Violet caught it with one smooth hand under the belly and tipped it back to the center. Hello, sir, she said, in a low, warm voice Julian had not heard before. Let's have a look at you. She bent over the puppy. She checked ears, eyes, teeth. Her hands were small and deft and absolutely certain, which he remembered from other contexts and was trying, currently, not to remember. The puppy rolled onto its back for her tail thumping. Peter said he wasn't eating, Julian offered. And that he was shaking. She lifted the puppy's lip. She checked the gums. She pressed a gentle hand on the belly. The puppy licked her wrist. Dr. Ross. This dog is fine. This dog is possibly the finest dog I have ever examined. Peter said. Peter lied. She looked up at him. He looked back. They held it for a long second, and then slowly comprehension arrived on Julian's face, the way comprehension arrives on the face of a man who has been had. That son of a... Dr. Ross. Maggie. Without a doubt. He looked at the ceiling. He breathed out through his nose. He ran a hand through his hair. She noticed, watching him, that his hair did not stay neat. It fought him. A small curl at the back refused to lie down. For some reason this made her throat tighten. "I'll talk to Peter," he said. "I'll talk to Maggie. We could leave, I guess." We could. Neither of them moved. The puppy was now gnawing on a corner of her sleeve. She undid the puppy's teeth from the fabric with a gentle finger and rubbed its belly. The puppy made a sound that was almost a purr. "He's not really yours?" she asked. "He is now, apparently. Peter said his cousin couldn't keep him." "Of course he did." "Of course." Julian stepped closer. Not on purpose. Just because the room was small, and the exam table was between them, and he leaned on it with both hands, and that brought him into the narrow patch of light from the window, and that put him about 1.5 feet from her face. She looked up. His eyes were brown. She had known that. She had known that for weeks. But this close, in this light, she could see that they were not just brown. They were brown with a gold ring near the pupil, and darker at the edges, and they were currently and very carefully not looking at her mouth. She was not looking at his either. She was resisting. "Your hands are shaking," he said low. "No, they aren't." "A little. A little." She breathed out. She felt him lean, one very small degree, across the table toward her. She leaned back. One very small degree. The room was quiet except for the tap of a tail on the metal table and the small wet sounds of puppy breath, and then the puppy shook itself, full body, ears, shoulders, tail, all the way down to the rear end, with the seismic commitment that puppies put into absolutely everything. The entire exam table vibrated. The puppy's ear flapped directly into Julian's chin. He jerked back. She jerked back. They stared at each other, and at the puppy, and at each other again. The puppy sneezed on her wrist. Violet, to her own horror, laughed. A real laugh. The kind she had been trying very hard not to give him. Julian's mouth twitched. He looked down at the puppy. He looked back up at her. His expression was very carefully composed and failing at several edges. "He's fine," she said quickly. "The dog, he's fine." "Good, good. Just water, food, a bed." "Right. Congratulations on the dog." "Thanks. You should name him." "I will." He picked the puppy up. It licked his ear. He did not quite look at her. She did not quite look at him. "Goodbye, Dr. Ross." "Miss Donovan." He left. She stood by the exam table for a full minute after the door closed, both hands flat on the metal, staring at a smear of puppy breath on the surface. Joyce in the waiting room was humming. Violet, after a moment, touched her lip with the tip of her finger. She pulled her hand down immediately. She was furious. She was not entirely sure with whom. The rain started at 6 and did not stop. By 9 it was the kind of rain that made people use the word biblical, which was a word Violet usually tried to avoid because she considered it lazy, but which she found herself thinking now as she stood under the awning of the small Italian place where the group had just finished dinner. The street was a river. The gutters were overflowing. A man across the road was walking with a newspaper on his head and getting exactly as wet as if he had not been. Her car was 3 blocks away. Her car was also, she remembered, sitting in her driveway at home, because she had caught a ride downtown with Maggie, who had now left with Peter half an hour earlier, after a whispered exchange that Violet had not, at the time, been suspicious of. She was now suspicious. The awning above her dripped. A cold drop landed on the back of her neck and slid down under her collar. She shivered. "Miss Donovan." She did not turn around. She closed her eyes briefly. She had known from the moment Maggie had left exactly who was still inside the restaurant finishing his coffee and exactly how this was going to end. "Dr. Ross." Julian came up beside her under the awning. He had put his coat on. His hair was damp at the ends, though he had not stepped into the rain yet. He smelled stubbornly like cedar. "No ride?" "Very observant." "I can drop you. I can walk." It is a monsoon. I am aware. He looked at her. She looked at the rain. Another cold drop landed on her neck. She twitched. Miss Donovan, don't. You are going to catch a cold. I will send you the bill. Violet. She looked at him. It was the first time he had used her first name. Not Miss Donovan. Not the dry, formal address they had both been hiding behind for weeks. Just Violet. Quiet. Flat, not a provocation. She opened her mouth, she closed it. Fine, she said. His car was warm. That was the first thing. She had been bracing against the cold for 20 minutes, and the sudden heat felt like sliding into a bath. He turned up the defrost. He turned down the radio, which had been playing some old jazz station. He pulled out into the slow black street. The wipers beat steady. The headlights lit a wall of water in front of the car. Inside, the noise of the rain was muffled into a hush that somehow made the silence between them feel bigger. She crossed her arms. She uncrossed them. She rested her hands in her lap like a schoolgirl, which annoyed her, so she moved them to her knees, which annoyed her more. You can relax, he said, eyes on the road. I am relaxed. You are sitting like someone on a first driving lesson. Dr. Ross. Julian. A pause. Julian. She said it carefully, like a foreign word. His hands shifted very slightly on the wheel. Somewhere on Maple they started talking. It was not clear who started it. Maybe her. She asked him something about the hardware store, whether Peter really had a cousin with a puppy to give away. He laughed, an actual laugh, short and quiet, not the kind that had once ended her afternoon in a dental chair. He said no. He said Peter had bought the dog himself and was now, in his words, committed to the bit. He had named the puppy Biscuit, which she said was a bad name, and which he admitted was a bad name, but he said Biscuit already answered to it, and it was too late. She told him about Miriam, the three-legged tabby, about how Miriam had bitten the mayor's wife during a routine checkup 2 years ago, about how Miriam still, somehow, had a full social calendar because people liked a cat with a story. He laughed again, twice in 5 minutes. Her own mouth, she realized, was doing something it rarely did in conversation with him. It was smiling. The car pulled up outside her house. Her porch light was on. The rain lashed sideways across the windshield. He did not turn off the engine at first. Then he did. Then it was only the rain, the faint heat of the vents, the tick of the cooling engine. Neither of them reached for a door. Thank you, she said. Sure. I was going to walk. I know. I would have made it. I don't doubt it. She laughed. She could not help it. It was a small, helpless laugh, tired and warm, and her hand, without her permission, came up and touched the sleeve of his coat at the crook of his elbow. A thank you touch, a 2-second touch. It was the first time they had touched outside of his dental chair. She felt him go still. She looked at his face. He was looking at her mouth. It was not the way he had looked at her mouth in the exam room at her clinic. There had been a table between them then, and a puppy, and a way to pretend. There was no table now. There was no puppy. There was only her hand still on his sleeve, and the rain on the windshield and his eyes on her lips and the smallest, quietest tilt of his body toward her. She should have pulled her hand back. She did not. His face moved just a fraction, an inch at most, the kind of movement a man makes when he has decided something and has not yet told himself he decided it. His hand, which had been on his thigh, lifted. It did not quite reach her. Her breath, she realized, had stopped. Her heart was very loud. And then she heard herself, in a shaky voice she barely recognized, say, "Thanks for the ride." It came out cracked. She yanked her hand off his sleeve like she had been burned. She fumbled for the door handle. She got it open on the second try, and the rain came in with a cold slap of reality, and she half fell out of the car onto the wet pavement. She did not fall. Almost. Her foot caught on the curb again, always the curb, and she steadied herself against the car door with a hand. "Good night, Julian." "Violet?" She shut the door. She ran up her walk, jacket over her head, and did not look back. Her key fumbled in the lock. She got inside. She leaned against the door. He sat in the car for another full minute. Then he turned the key. He pulled away slow. The wipers beat steady all the way home. He did not, at any point on the drive, smile. At a red light on the corner of 9th, alone, in the dark with the rain on his windshield, he said something very quiet to himself. A word. Just one. Her name. He drove on. Thursday afternoon, 4:15, and Violet was walking out of Harper's Bakery with a loaf of sourdough under her arm when she saw them. Julian was standing in front of Bennett's Cafe across the street. He was not alone. A young woman was hanging off his arm with both hands, laughing up at something he had just said, and he was looking down at her with the kind of soft, amused expression Violet had never, not once, seen on his face. The woman was pretty. Dark hair, a green coat, a laugh that carried across the street. Julian reached up and, with the back of 2 fingers, pushed her hair out of her eyes. Violet stood on the sidewalk with her bread. She did not remember deciding to stop walking. She only noticed after a few seconds that she had. Her mouth had gone dry. Her chest felt as if someone had set a small warm weight on it and then pressed down. She looked at her bread. She looked at the street. She looked at Julian, who now had an arm around the woman's shoulders and was steering her into the cafe with the easy familiarity of a man who had done it many times. He did not see her. She was almost grateful for that. She turned around. She walked the other way. She walked the full 6 blocks home instead of the 3 she needed, and by the time she got to her kitchen, her bread was crushed under her arm, and her jaw was set hard enough to hurt the repaired tooth. She put the bread on the counter. She sat down at the kitchen table. She did not cry. She was not the kind of woman who cried over a man she was not dating. She did, however, rub the side of her nose. Once. Hard. Then she got up and started calling Maggie. "You're being ridiculous," Maggie said. "I am not being ridiculous. Vi, honey, you saw a man across the street. I saw him with a woman. That could have been a cousin. He was touching her hair, Maggie. Maybe she had a bug in it. Maggie." Maggie sighed. Maggie, who knew more than she was saying, and who was biting her tongue so hard it actually hurt. Maggie had gotten a text from Peter 2 hours ago that said his sister is in town for a few weeks. Heads up. She had not yet found the moment to tell Violet. "Sweetheart, did you ever ask him if he was seeing anyone?" "Why would I ask him that?" "Because you care." "I do not care." "Vi." "Maggie, if you say Vi one more time in that voice, I am going to hang up." "Vi." Violet hung up. She stared at her phone. It buzzed immediately. She did not pick up. The next group dinner was 4 days later. She walked in and sat at the far end of the table. She did not greet Julian. She greeted everyone else. When Peter passed her the bread basket, she took it without looking past his shoulder. When Dana told a joke across the table, she laughed fully, deliberately, facing the window. Julian watched her. She could feel him watching her. He said her name at one point low, asking something about the wine. She answered in 2 words without turning her head. He tried again 10 minutes later, with something about Biscuit the puppy, and she said, "That's nice," and then immediately asked Maggie across the table whether she had finally picked out those curtains. The conversation went away from him. It stayed away from him. By dessert, his jaw had a little tight line in it that Peter across the table recognized and pretended not to see. Julian did not try again. When the table got up to leave, he did not walk Violet to her car. He did not offer. He put on his coat. He said goodnight to Peter and Maggie and Dana. He left. Maggie caught Violet on the sidewalk. What on earth was that? Nothing. That was not nothing. It was nothing. Violet Ann Donovan. Maggie, please. Not tonight. Maggie watched her go. Maggie then pulled out her phone and typed, very fast with both thumbs, "Houston, we have a problem." Peter wrote back. What now? She thinks the sister is his girlfriend. There was a long pause, then Peter's reply. Oh no. Julian, for his part, drove home with his hands tight on the steering wheel and his mouth a thin line. He did not know what had happened. That was the worst of it. He had replayed the last 2 weeks in his head the whole drive, and he could not find the moment it had turned. The rainy night in the car, maybe. He had leaned too close. He had let her see too much. Maybe she had decided, in the quiet of her own kitchen, that whatever was growing between them was not what she wanted. Maybe she had been polite about it in a way he could not read. Maybe she had decided he was, after all, the man who had laughed at her in a dental chair, and nothing he had done in the week since could undo that. He did not like the thought. He did not like more the fact that it mattered this much to him. He pulled into his driveway. His sister's rental car was already there. The kitchen light was on. He could see her through the window, in his kitchen, making tea, moving things out of alignment on his counter the way she had since they were kids. He sat in the driveway for a long second. He watched his sister put a mug down directly in the center of the cutting board, which was the wrong place. And instead of being annoyed, he felt only a dim, grateful love for her, because his sister was easy, and his sister knew him, and he did not, at the moment, know how to handle the other thing at all. He got out of the car. His sister flung the door open before he reached it. "Julian," she called, "I made tea. You look terrible. Come tell me about the woman." He stopped on the path. "What woman?" "The one who's making you look like that." He stared at her. "Go inside, Emma. Rude. Go inside." She laughed and pulled him through the door by his sleeve. He did not tell her about the woman. Not yet. The lunch was Maggie's idea. She had presented it over coffee on a Saturday morning as a small casual thing, nothing fancy. Just the group plus Julian's sister who's in town for a few weeks. It would be rude not to include her, which was an unbroken run of words that Violet recognized from long experience as a trap. She went anyway. She wore jeans and a cream sweater and did her hair the way she usually did, because she was not, absolutely not, going to a lunch looking like she was trying. She told herself this several times in the mirror, while also putting on a lipstick she rarely wore. She arrived 15 minutes late on purpose. Everyone was already there. Peter, Maggie, Dana, Julian, and, sitting beside Julian, laughing at something Dana had just said, the woman from across the street. Violet stopped in the doorway. The woman turned. Her whole face opened into a smile that was so warm and so unguarded, and so completely without any trace of the smug possessiveness Violet had been rehearsing in her head for a week that, for one disoriented second, Violet forgot what she was supposed to be feeling. "You must be Violet." Yes. "Oh, finally, I'm Emma." Emma stood up. Emma crossed the room in 3 steps. Emma hugged her. She was a hugger, a real one. 2 arms, full commitment, a brief squeeze. Violet, who had been braced for something cold and was now being squeezed against a wool cardigan that smelled like vanilla, patted Emma's back with one slightly stunned hand. "Julian," Emma called over her shoulder, "she's shorter than I thought." Emma. "What? She is. Sit down." Emma sat down. She sat down on the other side of Julian, not beside him in the coupled way Violet had pictured. Julian, at the head of the table, did not look at Violet. He looked at his glass of water. He moved it half an inch to the left. Violet took the seat across from them. She did not know yet why the room had gone slightly unreal, why the light through the window had the soft, fuzzy quality of a dream you were beginning to suspect you were in. Then Emma threw an arm around Julian's shoulders and shook him. "I was telling them, Vi. Can I call you Vi? Maggie says everyone calls you Vi. I was telling them, my big brother is literally impossible. He has never had a serious girlfriend in his entire adult life. Not one. He is 35 years old and he has the romantic life of a house cat." Julian closed his eyes. Violet, whose glass had been halfway to her mouth, set it back down very carefully. "He's always been like this," Emma went on, cheerfully oblivious. "Very particular, very tidy, very scared of women who are smarter than him, which is, frankly, most of them. I keep telling him. I keep saying, Julian, at some point, you have to let a human being into that clean, sad kitchen of yours." Emma. "And he looks at me like I'm speaking Portuguese." Maggie was hiding her face in her napkin. Peter was staring at the ceiling. Dana, bless her, took a very long, slow sip of wine and watched the whole thing with open joy. Violet was looking at Emma. Her brain was stringing words together with the slow, deliberate care of a person diffusing a bomb. My big brother. Big brother. Brother. She turned her head a quarter of an inch and looked for the first time since she had walked in, directly at Julian. He was already looking at her. His eyes were tired, a little dark under them. His jaw was tight, and he was not trying to hide it. He knew. She understood with a slow, hot wash of mortification that he knew exactly what she had thought, and he had been carrying it for a week, and he had not said a word to her. She opened her mouth. She closed it. "Excuse me," she said quietly. and got up and walked to the bathroom. She stood in the bathroom with her hands braced on the sink and her forehead almost against the mirror. "Idiot," she said to her own reflection, quietly, privately, once. The tap dripped. The faucet had a small water stain under it shaped like Oklahoma. She counted to 10. She rubbed the side of her nose. She made herself stop. She ran cold water over her wrists. Outside the bathroom door, she could hear Emma's voice, still laughing, still telling some new story that had the whole table going. She could not hear Julian. Julian was not saying anything. She looked at herself. Her eyes were a little red, not crying, not yet. "You have two options," she said to herself, still quiet. "Go back out there and apologize, or go back out there and pretend nothing happened." She thought about it. She was too proud for the first, too honest for the second. She went back out there. The rest of the lunch passed. She did not talk to him, she did not talk around him either, the way she had at the last dinner. She just sat there. She answered Emma's questions about the clinic. She laughed at one of Dana's jokes, not as hard as she had been laughing before, but enough to be polite. She ate exactly half of her pasta. She drank water. Julian ate almost nothing. He did not try to catch her eye. Once, when she reached for the bread, his hand was already there and they both pulled back at the same second, as if the basket had burned them. Emma saw it. Emma, for once, did not say anything. When the lunch was finished, Violet stood up, hugged Emma back when Emma insisted on another hug, kissed Maggie on the cheek and left. She did not look at Julian on the way out. At the door, with her hand on the knob, she almost did. Almost, she did not. Outside on the sidewalk, with the cool October air on her face, she realized her hands were shaking, and she could not tell whether it was from shame or from something else entirely. A car honked on the corner. A little girl walked past with a balloon. The world continued. She walked home the long way again. She did not know how to fix it. That was the worst part. She had said nothing to fix, not technically. She had only been cold. She had only pulled away. She had not accused him of anything out loud, so there was nothing to take back out loud. And that made it worse, because now there was no sentence she could say to him without making the whole misunderstanding bigger than it had been. Her key fit the lock on the first try this time. She went inside. She sat on the couch in her coat and did not take it off for an hour. Peter was an honest man who was about to lie to 6 people at once. He stood in the middle of his living room with a printed reservation confirmation in his hand and tried to look casual. Maggie sat on the couch with her legs tucked under her, watching him the way a coach watches a rookie pitcher. "Say it again." "6 rooms." "With conviction, Peter." "6 rooms, Mags. I booked 6 rooms." "Better." "The inn only had 5 available by the time I called back. Total accident. Absolute coincidence. The last 2 people to arrive are going to have to share, and I am truly sorry about it. Truly, these things happen." "Good. I hate this. I know." Julian is going to absolutely lose it. Probably. But later. Not this weekend. Peter let his head fall back against the wall and stared at the ceiling. Maggie. This is crazy. It is. We are sending 2 grown adults who are currently not speaking to each other into a single room with a single bed and calling it a coincidence. Yes. And you believe this will work? "I believe," Maggie said, unfolding her legs and standing up, "that those 2 have been about to kiss each other every time they've been in the same room for 2 months, and the only thing stopping them is the fact that they're always surrounded by us. If we put them in a locked room with a mattress, one of them is going to crack. Or they're going to leave the group forever. Possibility. Mags. Trust me. I do. That's my problem." The inn was in the mountains, 2 hours north, an old white clapboard place with black shutters and a wraparound porch. It had 6 guest rooms, a breakfast parlor, a stone fireplace in the lobby, and an owner named Mrs. Abernathy, who had been bribed by Maggie with a full pint of homemade strawberry jam. The group rolled in on Friday afternoon in 2 cars. Violet arrived with Maggie. Julian arrived with Peter. Dana came with her boyfriend, whose name was Jesse, and who said maybe 8 words a day, but always the right ones. Emma had flown back to Ohio 3 days earlier, which had both relieved and devastated Maggie, who had been planning to use Emma as a chaperone if things got out of hand. They checked in at the front desk. Mrs. Abernathy, sturdy and 60-something, handed out keys with the pleasant briskness of a woman who had forgotten what her lines were supposed to be. Calloway Hart, room 2, Ross, room... Oh, said Julian. Mrs. Abernathy made a small apologetic face that was not entirely convincing. I am so sorry. I thought we had 6, but we only have 5 rooms ready tonight. One of them had a pipe situation last week. The last 2 of you will have to share. There was a beat. Maggie became deeply interested in her fingernails. Peter was studying the ceiling. Dana, arm through Jessie's, had her lips pressed so tight her cheeks were pink. Julian turned his head, slowly, and looked at Violet. Violet, who had been holding her overnight bag over one shoulder, slid it carefully to the floor. You have got to be kidding me, she said. I'm so sorry, dear, said Mrs. Abernathy. Mrs. Abernathy. Yes, dear. Is there a couch? There is. Can I sleep on it? I'm afraid it belongs to our lobby. Could you bring it up? It's nailed down, dear. Julian, to his own horror, nearly laughed. He swallowed it. Violet's eyes slid to his face, and he suspected she had felt the near laugh and was, somewhere behind her composure, storing it for later use. I can sleep in the car, he said quietly to her. You are not sleeping in the car. Violet, it's 40 degrees tonight. I have a coat. You have a coat, Dr. Ross. You do not have a sleeping bag, a heater, or the ability to operate a toothbrush without a running faucet. Sit down. Mrs. Abernathy, watching this, pressed a hand to her mouth. I'll take the couch in the room, he said, if there's a couch in the room. There's an armchair, dear. I'll take the armchair. It's rattan. There was a long pause. We'll figure it out, Violet said at the end of a very long breath. She picked her bag up again. She held out her hand. Julian looked at her hand. The key, she said. He put it in her palm. Upstairs, the room had a 4-poster bed with a white quilt. There was, as promised, a rattan armchair in the corner that looked like it would betray any grown man who sat in it. There was a bathroom the size of a closet. There was one window with a view of the mountain, and there was on the bed a single decorative pillow in the shape of a heart. Julian stared at the heart pillow for a full 5 seconds. Absolutely not, Violet muttered, crossed the room, and shoved the heart pillow under the bedskirt where neither of them would have to look at it again. Agreed. They planned this. I know. Peter planned this. Maggie planned this. Both of them planned this. Yes. She sat down on the edge of the bed. He stayed standing by the door. So, she said. So, we have 2 options. Okay. 1, we yell at them. Tempting. 2, we pretend it doesn't bother us so we don't give them the satisfaction. He considered. His hands were in his coat pockets. His shoulders were tight in a way he did not want her to notice. 2, he said. 2, she agreed. We split the bed. Pillow down the middle. Pillow down the middle. I'll shower first if you want. I'll sleep in a t-shirt. Fine. He nodded once. She nodded once. Neither of them moved for almost 20 seconds. Julian. Yes. About... She stopped. She looked at her hands. He waited. He did not rush her. His face, which had been carefully neutral, softened. Forget it, she said. Violet. Tomorrow. We'll talk tomorrow. I need a night to not have feelings about any of this. He almost smiled. Almost. Okay. He set his bag down. He went to shower. She sat on the edge of the bed in the quiet room with the mountain darkening outside the window, and she thought very clearly, for the first time all week, this is going to be the longest night of my life. She was correct. She turned off the lamp at 11:45. She'd been pretending to read for 40 minutes. She had in that time read the same paragraph approximately 16 times, a paragraph about a woman named Constance, who was deciding whether to return to her family estate in the spring. Violet did not know who Constance was. She had opened the book to a random chapter and committed to the fiction that she was enjoying it. Beside her, Julian had been pretending to read something on his phone. A long pillow lay between them, running the length of the bed. She had put it there herself. He had not commented. He had only, when he climbed in on his side, adjusted it an inch to the left, which she had recognized as a purely involuntary act, and had chosen, mercifully, not to mention. "Good night," she said. "Good night." She turned off her lamp. He turned off his. The room went dark except for the faint silver of the mountain outside the window. She could hear him breathing, slow even, too controlled to be natural, which told her he was as wide awake as she was. She closed her eyes. The room smelled of old wood, of lavender soap from the bathroom, of the cedar under his skin that was not any of his shampoo and was, she had decided weeks ago, simply him. She pulled the covers up higher. She did not move. Neither did he. She counted sheep. She got to 40. She gave up. Outside somewhere, an owl called twice. She was conscious, with an intensity that felt almost rude, of every inch of him on the other side of the pillow. The weight of him in the mattress, the small sound when he swallowed, the warmth which she could not logically be feeling across 8 inches of stuffing, but which she felt anyway, as if the bed itself were reporting it to her. She fell asleep eventually. She did not know when. Dawn came in pale and grey. She woke up warm. That was the first thing. A good, deep warmth. The kind of warmth that makes you reluctant to open your eyes. The second thing was that she was not on her side of the bed. The third thing was that the pillow was on the floor. The fourth thing was the arm. An arm was across her waist. A hand was loosely curled against her stomach. Her head was tucked into the hollow of a shoulder. Her own hand was flat against a chest, and she could feel under her palm the steady, slow beat of a heart. She did not open her eyes. She was absolutely certain that if she opened her eyes, she would have to decide something, and she did not want to decide anything yet. The chest under her hand was rising and falling in a rhythm she recognized. The breath moving past her temple was warm and even. His other hand, she realized, was somewhere in her hair, not gripping. Resting, as if it had found her in the dark and simply stayed there. He was still asleep. She thought very slowly about her options. She could roll away. He would not know. He might wake and think he had dreamed it. She could spare them both. She could stay here for another minute. Just one. The minute was already happening, technically, and she had not decided to stay, so maybe that did not count. She stayed. She felt with a kind of horror how exactly right it was, how the shape of her fit against the shape of him without any adjustment, how her cheek knew somehow that the curve of his shoulder was where it belonged. He shifted a little, and his arm tightened across her waist, not awake, still asleep, a sleeping body making a sleeping decision. A low sound came from his throat, not a word, just a warm, contented sound that a man makes when he is very comfortable and does not yet know he should not be. She stopped breathing. She felt him begin to wake. He surfaced slowly. Julian did not wake up fast. He never had. He came up in layers. First the awareness of light, then the awareness of warmth, then the awareness of a specific weight on his chest and the smell of hair that was not his. He opened his eyes. She was looking up at him. Her eyes were very close, and grey-green in the morning light and very awake. Her hair was across his shoulder. Her hand was on his chest. His arm was around her. Their bodies were, and he was aware of this with the completeness of a man who could not pretend not to be, pressed against each other down the entire length of them. Neither of them moved. "Julian?" "Yes. The pillow is on the floor." "I can see that." "I didn't do it." "I don't think I did it either." Her mouth curved. Not quite a smile. Not quite anything. His heart was doing something urgent. He could feel her feeling it, her palm flat against his chest. He did not think he could move. He did not know whether this was because he did not want to, or because his body was refusing to. She did not move either. Her eyes went to his mouth, then back to his eyes. Her throat moved as she swallowed. He could have kissed her. It would have been at that moment the easiest thing he had ever done. He did not. He closed his eyes just for a second. He breathed in. He breathed out. He opened his eyes again and looked at her with such a quiet, focused tenderness that she almost cried, and instead she felt the corner of her own mouth pull, helpless, in a direction it was not supposed to go. "Violet," he said. I'm going to move. Okay. It is going to take me a minute. Take two. He almost laughed. She felt it in his chest before she heard it. A single warm huff. He took the minute. He took it slowly. One arm, then the other. He sat up. He got out of the bed without looking at her, because looking at her would have, at that moment, undone him. And he was a man who understood, finally, what being undone would cost them both if he did it here now in a borrowed bed. He went into the bathroom. He closed the door. She heard the water turn on. She lay there on her side in the warm dent he had left, and she put both hands over her face, and she laughed once, quiet and surprised, into her own palms. Maggie cracked on a Tuesday. She had held out for 3 days after the trip, which for Maggie was a geological record. She and Violet were sitting at Violet's kitchen table with 2 mugs of tea, when Maggie, looking at the tablecloth with great concentration, said the words, "There is something I have to tell you," in a voice Violet had last heard when they were 19, and Maggie had dented her car. The confession came out in one long breath, the dinner that Peter and Maggie had not been sick for, the puppy that had belonged to no cousin, the reservation at the inn that had always been 5 rooms, because there had never been a 6th. Violet listened with her hands wrapped around her mug. She did not speak for a long time after Maggie finished. "Get out," she said finally, quiet, flat. Get out of my kitchen, Maggie." Maggie got out. He found out an hour later. Peter, braver than Maggie in some ways and less so in others, told him in person, standing in Julian's living room with his hands in his coat pockets. Julian listened in silence. When Peter was done, Julian walked to the door, opened it and held it open without a word. Peter went. The door closed. Julian stood in his own hallway with the taste of something bitter in his mouth, because now he did not know which of the last 2 months had been real. The dinner, the puppy, the inn, the way she had looked at him in the grey light at dawn. He could not untangle what she would have done on her own from what she had been steered into. He could not worse untangle his own feelings from the architecture Peter and Maggie had built under them. He did not call her. She did not call him. 3 weeks passed. The storm came on a Thursday night in October. It was not supposed to be that bad. The forecast had said rain. What it delivered was the kind of weather that made old people remember other storms by name. Wind broke branches down Main Street. Power flickered in half the county. At 10:30, Violet, asleep on her couch still in her work clothes, woke to her phone buzzing itself off the coffee table. The clinic alarm. Water sensor in the boarding room. She was out the door in 2 minutes. The boarding room was under 4 inches of water and rising. The ceiling over the back wall was bulging. Tiles dripped. A brown stain was spreading along the seam. The recovery kennels were on the back wall. In the kennels were 3 cats, a dachshund named Otis recovering from surgery, and Miriam the 3-legged tabby, who did not like water and was telling everyone. Violet did not cry. She did not have time. She was on her knees in the wet, pulling Otis out of a lower kennel, when she heard the front bell jangle. She froze. Violet. She closed her eyes. Julian. He was in the doorway in a soaked coat, work boots, a toolbox in one hand, and a flashlight in the other. His hair was plastered to his forehead. He did not look at her first. He looked at the ceiling. He looked at the water. He set the toolbox down. "Who called you?" she said. "Nobody. Peter mentioned last week your roof was bad." "He's out of town." "I know." He was already moving. He grabbed a stack of towels. He waded to the back wall. "Get the animals out first." "I'm doing it. I'll get the ceiling." "Julian." "Later." They worked. For 4 hours they worked, almost without speaking. He climbed a ladder and pushed back the bulging tile, redirected the leak into a bucket, then another bucket. She moved every animal into the front exam room, dried them, calmed them. Miriam bit him on the thumb. He said, "Fair," and kept working. The rain eased at 3 in the morning. The leak slowed to a drip. They sat down, both of them, on the wet floor of the boarding room with their backs against the clean wall. He was muddy. She was worse. Her hair had come loose from its knot and stuck to her neck. Otis the dachshund, clean and dry, was asleep in her lap. "You are," he said, looking at the ceiling, "the most stubborn woman I have ever met." You are the most arrogant man. You walked out on me with a broken tooth. You laughed at me on the worst day of my life. I know. He said it quiet. No defense. He turned his head to look at her. I have been trying to apologize for that for 4 months. I have been trying not to let you. Why? Because if I let you, I'd have to admit I wanted you to. Silence. She did not look at him. Her hand on Otis was still. He stood up. She stood up. Violet, he said. Julian. I can't stop thinking about you. I am trying. I am not a man who cannot stop thinking. It is very irritating. It's mutual. Is it? Unfortunately. He took one step. She took one step. He caught her face in both hands, and she pulled him down by the wet front of his shirt, and they kissed in the middle of a flooded veterinary clinic with a dachshund watching from the floor. It was not a polite kiss. It was everything 4 months of not saying had built up. His mouth was warm, hers was not careful. One of his hands slid into her hair and the other found the small of her back and held her there, and she felt him shaking a little, and she was shaking too. And then they both started laughing against each other's mouths because it was ridiculous, and it was relief, and it was finally. He pulled back. He looked at her. Come home with me, he said. She nodded. His house was quiet. He brought her a towel. He brought her a t-shirt. He did not rush. He stood in his bedroom doorway with his hand loose on the frame and looked at her the way a man looks at something he is afraid to touch wrong. She crossed the room. She put both hands flat on his chest. Stop standing there, she said, soft. He breathed out. His forehead came down to hers. His hand came up and cupped the back of her neck. What happened that night was not the sort of thing that could be narrated in a hurry. It was slow. It was careful. It was full of the long unsaid of months. He kissed the inside of her wrist as if apologizing to it. She traced the line of his jaw with a fingertip and felt him go still under her hand. They laughed once, quietly, when he knocked a lamp sideways with an elbow. He righted it without looking, which made her laugh again. And afterward, with her head on his chest and his hand slow in her hair and the rain starting up again outside the window, she said, I don't forgive you for laughing at me. I know. I am keeping it. Forever. Forever. His hand went still. Okay, he said, quiet. She fell asleep, smiling into his shoulder. He did not sleep for a long time. He just looked at her. They lasted 9 days. That was how long they held out before the friends figured it out, and Julian was on record afterward as saying it would have been 12 if Violet had stopped blushing every time Peter said his name. The tell, in the end, was the coffee. Julian brought her one, black with 1 sugar, into the group's Sunday brunch at Peter and Maggie's kitchen, and he set it down in front of her without asking, because he knew how she took it now, and Maggie saw it. And Maggie set down her fork with the slowness of a woman watching a miracle, and Maggie said, Julian Ross, you knew how she takes her coffee. He did not look up. Violet turned pink. Peter began to laugh. He laughed until he had to wipe his eyes. Maggie got up, came around the table, threw both arms around Violet's neck and shrieked directly into her ear. Maggie, I am not sorry. I am still angry at you. Sure, honey. Violet, pinned under her best friend, looked across the table at Julian. His mouth was doing the corner thing. He shrugged one shoulder, the smallest guilty shrug of a man caught with his hand in a cookie jar he no longer planned to deny. She laughed. Maggie cried. Peter opened a bottle of champagne at 11 in the morning, which was not strictly legal before lunch according to Maggie's mother's rules, but nobody enforced them. The celebration lunch happened 2 weekends later at Peter and Maggie's. Dana came. Jessie came. Even Emma flew in from Ohio for it, because Maggie had texted her and Emma had replied, I am booking a flight right now, Maggie. Do not let them unhappen. Halfway through dessert, Julian stood up, glass in hand. I want to say one thing. Oh no, said Violet, be brief. I am in love with the most beautiful and stubborn woman in this room. Julian. And I am telling everyone now, because if I keep it inside any longer, I am going to do something undignified. Too late, Emma called. The table laughed. Violet reached over and pinched his forearm under the edge of his rolled-up sleeve. She leaned up. She spoke directly into his ear, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Your life was too tidy. I came along to mess it up for you. You should be thanking me." He set the glass down, he picked her up, he kissed her in front of all of them, held her there a second and put her back in her chair. Maggie screamed. Peter poured more champagne. The proposal was in March. He took her to a small restaurant in Ashford, a place with candles and a violinist and menus in soft leather. Violet wore a deep red dress with pearl earrings her mother had given her. She noticed halfway through the car ride that Julian had adjusted his tie 3 times. He adjusted it again at the table. He reached for his water glass and moved it half an inch. He moved his fork so it was parallel to the knife. He moved it back. She watched him do all of this over her menu and felt her stomach turn very slowly over, and then she understood. And then she did not say a word, because she was not going to ruin it for him. At dessert, he set his spoon down. He stood up. He came around the table and the restaurant went still the way restaurants do when something private is about to happen in public, and he went down on one knee in front of her. "Violet." "Julian." His hand was shaking a little. She saw it and loved it. "The day you walked out of my office with a broken tooth," he said, "was the worst day of my professional life and the best day of my personal one. I have not had a single quiet thought since. Oh, Julian. You are the only mess I have ever met that I don't want to put in order." She laughed. She cried. "Yes," she said, before he had finished asking. "Let me finish." "No." "Yes, give me the ring." He laughed. He gave her the ring. The restaurant clapped. The violinist, who had been standing 3 feet away pretending not to listen, played something that was either joyful or frantic. Someone at the next table sent over wine. He kissed her across the dessert plates. His hand was still shaking. Hers was too. 2 years later, on a Sunday afternoon in early June, he was on their back porch trying to assemble a small wooden pen. He had measured it twice. He had leveled the corners. He had a small set of marked pieces laid out on the porch floor, each one labeled with a piece of blue painter's tape in his own careful handwriting. Violet watched him from the cushioned rocker. She was 8 months along. She was barefoot. She had one hand on the curve of her stomach, which was the size at the moment of a late watermelon. She had a glass of iced tea on the small table beside her, and she was wearing one of his old grey t-shirts because nothing else still fit her comfortably, and her hair was piled on top of her head in a way that meant she had given up on it. Biscuit, now a full-grown golden retriever who had never really stopped being a puppy in spirit, was asleep at her feet. Miriam, the 3-legged tabby adopted at last, was asleep on the porch rail. Otis the dachshund, now theirs, was not asleep. Otis was standing in the middle of Julian's carefully aligned pieces, tail high, looking extremely pleased with himself. Otis. He wants to help. Violet, he is standing on piece C. He loves piece C. There are 14 pieces. He picked his favorite. Julian looked at her. She smiled at him over her iced tea. "Move him," he said. "No." He stood up. He walked over. He picked Otis up with one hand under the belly, kissed the dachshund on the ear without thinking about it, and set him down on the grass. Otis, undeterred, immediately walked back onto piece C. Julian exhaled through his nose. He looked at Violet. "Our life is chaos. You love it." "I do." He crossed the porch. He knelt down beside her rocker and put both hands very gently on the curve of her stomach. The baby, as if on cue, kicked once, a firm, solid nudge against his left palm. His face did something he would not have let anyone else see. "Julian." "Yes." "Piece C just fell off the porch." "I know." Otis took it. "I know." He did not move. He kept his hands where they were. She rested her hand on top of his. The afternoon smelled like cut grass and iced tea and the faintest trace of cedar. The dog ran across the lawn with piece C in his mouth. Miriam opened one eye, judged the situation unworthy of comment, and went back to sleep. Biscuit let out a long, contented sigh. Violet looked down at the top of her husband's dark head, where he was pressed gently against her belly. She thought about the sidewalk, the pothole, the sourdough in the bakery window, the pillow on the floor of the inn, the flooded boarding room, The way he had said, "I can't stop thinking about you," like it was a crime. She put her hand in his hair. "Julian." "Thank you for laughing at me." He went still. Then he laughed, very quiet, against her. "Anytime." Leave your comment and share this story with someone special. It truly helps us keep bringing new stories to you. And if you want to follow every chapter of this emotional journey, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. Your support makes all the difference.